I welcome the art around me, the art that heals me and touches my soul. I meditate to the sounds of the world around me, a flute in the distance, a drumming of a sledgehammer, the ebb and flow of the traffic. Art is all around me. As I wake and the quilt on my bed, the lamp, the dresser, the shower curtain, and the paintings on the wall, the bowl of my cereal, the label on my milk, the spoon, my towel, socks, pants, shirt, and shoes, the trim on the walls in the hall of my building, the offbeat colors on those walls, the tile 324 on my foyer, and the bright sticker on my mailbox. I see the dizzying art and the gargoyle on the side of my building, a hospital once, a rooming board once, forgotten and now apartments, the metal gates around the garbage, the sky, the Starbucks, the ad on my phone charger station in front, the pile of objects surrounding the homeless girl parked in front, her makeup, the bike lanes green, the coffee cup in my hand, the Metro card, the bus, the clothes on those fellow travelers, their various masks, my stop, the donut shop across from me, the grocery store, the graffiti on its walls, the tags, the building I enter, the carved shapes of the stairs, the people inside, the paintings of masters long gone and overstuffed chairs, the library, the creaky stairs, the cheese plate, the podium, my words. My art, our art, being part of the art. Here with art, Art Heals. Thank you.
Before and beyond. Stories often begin with the phrase, "in the beginning." It is almost indescribably comforting, carrying with it an assured aura of magic. Yet, and still, the phrase is open to being rendered, if not useless, at least more of an open question than simple statement. If school day's grammar serves, a dependent clause is only a gambit, not a play in and of itself. Beginning suggests an end and requires conclusion as a condition of its existence. Inescapable questioning proceeds. What happened just before that? Beyond the veil of recorded time, the nanoseconds that preceded the forward, assuming forward, of course, flow of time as we mark and know it. Instruments can now pierce the furthest reaches of history, all the way back to when the universe was only miasma, void and formless as some traditional texts have it. More instrumentality of the same order is on its way because discovery leads to discovery, does it not? It seems as far as quantum theory and all the applied sciences resultant have brought us, there's always one step more awaiting a footfall to fill it, a moment before all of it ever got started, at least one more question to ask. Human societies came into existence long after the stellar beginning, the Big Bang, of course, and are in their infancy when compared even to geologic time. But even with the astonishing evolutionary progress we've made, we've got some distance to travel. The big questions that came to mind in recent days, where the news cycle spins from the laughable to the tragic with no breaking for context aside from a commercial, or how is it that the same cop Tom Joad said he'd fight is still and all beating up a guy on the corner? And how far will we ever come toward becoming a functioning, egalitarian society? Is it even in us? Scaling down the field of focus to the observable, pungent reality of who and what we are, it appears we are creatures given to systematic organization and always have been, in line and accordance with other forms of life evolving on Earth. Many species of bird fly in patterns that develop first as random movements, but gel to form swirling masses in the skies, all dipping and reeling on thermals that display one intention, if not one mind. Is it so hard to fathom why we adhere so strongly to imperatives that feel like instinct, even one imposed by the will of the group. Pecking order, totem pole, rank and file, all these are groupings, hierarchies, and they seem to be among the first things we created, haves and have-nots. Somewhere along the line, those who found themselves in charge took advantage of what is arguably more than half our self-preservation instinct, the pure selfishness, petty greed stoked by the desire to hold what you gained even if you don't need it, and turn that into a switch you can flip to suppress your conscience and settle the pain that must shred what's left of your heart as you kick the life out of male black on traffic stop number 294 and say it's because he made you chase him. In the here and now, acrid air sours more by the day, desiccated dust threatens to engulf the verdant lungs of the world, and the seas themselves spoil and blacken. Every step of progress, it could be said, is another foot forward on a march to the death house. The folkways, traditions, and way it's always been wrap us as surely as shrouds, but that doesn't have to be so. The antidote and way toward understanding where humanity must ultimately go is to keep looking up, keep looking backward in time by way of radio telescope, and go as far as we can with direct exploration. Cultural norms in place for so long are soon taken for granted. But that is no license for their immortality. If there was indeed a beginning to it all, there was a time just before that, when there were no rules or rulers, no masters or slaves, and every dancing atom that would one day coalesce into trolley cars and lollipops, rainbows and sarcophagi, was undifferentiated enough so that the common source that gave energy and drive to the dance of life-seeking life, even on the infinitesimal level, was shared and shared alike. If the capacity for building stairways to the stars exists, why should then the urge to brutalize and destroy remain? There isn't any good, easy answer to that one, certainly, but the fact that we haven't yet tamed all our savagery can't be reason enough to give up on expanding the boundaries of compassion, opening the frontiers of selflessness, and somehow finding that common thread, binding tie, and shared goal that can and must unite all the striving sentience and self-determination in the known world, because with or without us, known and unknown galaxies will continue to expand with dark matter and energies far beyond our reckoning power. Maybe we can best hope to one day let unfettered imagination always and only be the guide for the mind that explores, the heart that seeks, the soul that yearns, letting the way it always was fall away into the swirl of time, local, geologic, or cosmic. Thank you very much.
It was by all definitions certainly a dream. My upstairs neighbors from hell, who present oh so well, were across the street from our building in another building. Check. I pat myself on the back recalling this dream because I relocated them. I moved them out with their noisy kids to another building. The blocks in said dream fell closer than normal, and their two little girls, one about 2.5, the other 5.5, with outstretched arms above their little bobbing heads, were waving and smiling enthusiastically at me. Was there someone behind me that they were really waving to? No. It was as if they were so close they could see into my apartment and I could see into theirs. Their parents seemed like the absentee parents they usually seem like when they are hammering, drilling, banging, and vacuuming on their floors, my ceiling. A nightmare or a dream. The two converge. The girls, always audible with their high-pitched squealing voices, even now, in my dream, are shrieking in delight as they notice me. How can I not wave back? Even though I'm taking actions against their lifeline, their parents, about the excessive noise that parents are creating with whatever they are building. Another room, another floor, inside their apartment, along with the incessant noise their daughters are making, starting at 6:50 a.m. I dream of their meal times because it's a guaranteed time of relative silence, although such meals are short-lived because they are followed by the youngest running the length of their apartment, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, the speed increasing. The mom calls it just walking. It sounds like a relay race. I imagine the parents cheering her on as she gets to either end of the apartment until I hear a thud, followed by crying, screaming, and then the construction-like noises resume, possibly with a permit, more likely illegal. I awake from the dream nightmare, from the delightful sister children's trying to engage me from across the street as their dad does what's become a daily routine, using tools to scrape the edges of the walls where they meet the floors, the length which is long, also known as my ceiling. I hear periodic, dull, loud, and heavy sounds. I can't swear I know what kettle balls sound like when they're dropped on the ceiling, but I think the sounds I'm hearing are pretty close, maybe barbells. The youngest cries often, every morning, every evening. I theorize she's a narcissist in the making, a child with what used to be called a bad temperament. The older girl started school recently. She's the quiet one, the one I theorize is being groomed to not upset the apple cart, her family. She's the one observing the constant shouting, crying, running, hammering, banging, and scraping sounds. She's the good child, the one who won't be adding to the noise, who won't be disturbing the universe. Their parents are equally loud on the street. TMI, too much information. I hear the dad trying to engage someone in conversation, or rather, have an audience. I look out my front windows and see the dad talking at an elderly, stooped-over man who smokes daily outside his building next to ours. He never answers. Maybe he nods. The dad sounds like he's delivering a monologue. If the girls can't walk as opposed to run in their apartment, how could they have been flower girls at a wedding they were recently at in Wisconsin? I hear this story 2 rooms away from my front window of our brownstone-lined block. I imagine the youngest as a flower girl in her cement shoes, clod-hopping her way down the aisle, and the attendees hurling rice at her rather than at the recently proclaimed man and wife. My dream or nightmare is taking up too much real estate in my head as the very real estate prices are climbing higher and higher in the neighborhood and making relocation for me in the vicinity not a desirable or a possible option. I think of the poet's line, ingrained from elementary school, good fences make good neighbors, but when I come home to the children's art affixed to my apartment door, apparently we went to different schools. Today I passed them on the stairs as we went in opposite directions, and they're in their very typical fashion, as I said earlier. They present well, especially when the girls are with them, when they're in front of other neighbors. But in true nightmare form, the dad sends me cruel text messages that keep shrinking in length as it must be obvious to them that I don't open them, as recommended by a lawyer I contacted. The 5.5-year-old was wearing what looked like a costume, though there was no holiday. She was dressed in what our neighborhood standard girl Halloween costume is, leotard with layers and layers of gauzy mesh tutu. The mom greets me between pursed lips. I'm monosyllabic. Their conversation goes from curt and pleasant and fake good neighborly to these nasty texts. A lawyer friend says menacing, not quite a felony, but approaching it. My district council member staff says what they are doing construction-wise is probably illegal. Don't move. Whatever you do, don't move. The neighbors are expanding their real estate in our building. Seems like every day more strollers, scooters, helmets are encroaching on shared space. There are 6 bicycles now outside the front of the building for 2 children. I never in my wildest dreams, to use this most overused phrase, would think I'd have this kind of reaction to my neighbors, and certainly not to children. The parents barely speak to me, nor I to them. The youngest, the younger, the crier, she sees me, she smiles, she blows kisses at me when she sees me. Tomorrow, another variant of the nightmare dream fantasy begins again. At some point, they leave, they go away for the day, the weekend, but it's like I have phantom limbs. I still expect the noise. But now, because I leave earlier and earlier, I now have several new teaching opportunities in the neighborhood, and I will be inviting to the celebration our district council member.
I was going to preface this by saying this is part of my memoir about immigrating from Russia, but I don't currently support Russia, I support Ukraine, so I just wanted to say that. Okay, family photographs. I was born into a vanishing world, and before time that, almost as soon as it ended, became too embarrassing to mention, too embarrassing even to recall. In a photograph from the early 80s, my mother, her face framed by dark bangs, stands in front of a miniature log cabin in Park Sosnovka. In front of her, a little girl dressed in a red sweater and a tan jacket looks uncertainly into the camera. The woman holds the girl by the shoulders, perhaps a little too tightly, as if the child might fall over or run away. In another picture, my father, with a ridiculous shock of frizzy hair, awkwardly balances the girl in front of a still blue lake, an artificial lake bounded by concrete, a relic, I was told, of an old quarry. The photographs are flat and some have faded to watercolor-like impressions, but I see them as dioramas, quaint little stage sets in a museum where lifelike characters are frozen with the accoutrements of a bygone era. I was there and I'm supposed to know the story, and yet whenever I see those images, I can't help wondering what happens the moment my father puts away the camera, and what has become of these young, fragile figures. Picking up on my accent, people still ask, "Where are you from?" The answer, from Russia, St. Petersburg, has become automatic. Until Putin's invasion of Ukraine, I knew exactly what the answer evoked. A civilized European city with wide streets and famous museums, a place one might visit once on vacation and talk about at dinner parties. The other, more truthful reply, in which I'd mentioned the 10 years I spent in Israel, invited less sympathy. Yet the place where I grew up had little to do with the St. Petersburg of great novels or travel brochures. Our neighborhood on the outskirts of Leningrad had no canals, no magisterial buildings, only an endless sprawl of post-war apartment blocks punctuated by schools, cultural centers, and state-run department stores with chronic deficits. Fortunately, in our neighborhood, there was also the forest-like park where I walked with my mother or grandmother every day, and the artificial lake in which we bathed in the summer, and on which in the winter all their children skated with breakneck speed. Yes, the dreaded monotony of Cold War propaganda pervaded my childhood, but to me, aged no more than 7, there was nothing so reassuring, so normal as that uniformity. No matter what happened, I knew that the beef kotletki and mashed potatoes that my grandmother prepared for our dinner were much like the ones my friends devoured after our mothers dragged us away from the playground. I knew that once they cleared their plates, their grandmothers might let them have korovka candy or mishka kosolape with a picture of a brown bear on the wrapper. Then, before bed, all the children in the neighborhood would watch the cartoons on Spokojne Noci Maleshi and would begin to feel drowsy with the first notes of the closing lullaby. The year was demarcated by the changing of the seasons, the long snow-covered winter during which we skied on long trails in the park or swished down the iced-over sleds in the playground, the slow, somehow mysterious melting of the snow in the early spring, and the brief warm summer when we took the elektrichka to the seaside and bathed in the chilly Baltic. And then there were the disruptions, turns in the normal order of things, as if suddenly and without cause or explanation, Some of the floorboards in our living room fell away, leaving a gaping hole through which we could see the neighbor's apartment, or perhaps nothing at all. I recall one afternoon like that when I was very young. My sister Zhenya was still a baby, lying under pink blankets in a large pram that my father was pushing down one of the park's gravel paths. Maybe that in itself was unusual, my father being put in charge of the baby and me for the entire afternoon, but I didn't notice it then. The way through the park was familiar, and the stretch of gravel, flanked by rows of benches, was only a dull bit of walking on the way to the playground. On the benches, old women in kerchiefs sat, knitting and gossiping, looking at passerby with hard, beady eyes. They used to frighten me, but we never talked to them, and so I tried not to notice them. Suddenly, the pram stopped. I looked up and saw my father standing beside it, tense and alert. An old woman in a gray woolen kerchief had risen from the bench and was leaning over the baby carriage, almost touching the pink blanket tucked under my sister's chin. "Oh, какая хорошенькая, what a lovely girl," the old lady crooned in a raspy voice. "What's her name?" "Evgenia," my father said. The woman smiled approvingly. "And she's been christened?" My father nodded quickly, murmured something I couldn't hear, and then wished the old lady a good day and started walking quickly towards the playground. I raced to catch up with him. "What does christen mean?" I later asked him. I don't remember what he answered, if he answered at all, but whatever he said didn't satisfy me. What I really wanted to know and could not ask is, why was he afraid of the question of the old woman? And does it mean that I must also be afraid? And if so, of what and for how long? Thank you.
I would like to take a moment and just say how grateful I am for Harold Slater. The song I'm about to sing is a piece that I wrote, but was inspired by a character that Harold wrote for me. And I was so grateful for having a character written for me. Wow, that's great. And we ended up doing a show called Steps. And this is a song from that show. This is a song about forgiveness. I still hurt sometimes in the middle of the night when it's still dark and quiet and there's no one else inside in the darkness. The secret that I tell myself is that I loved him more than I ever loved anyone else. I know it was wrong now, but it felt so right. Didn't know this would haunt me for the rest of my life. I wanna forgive him, but it's so hard to do. I guess the truth is someone hurt him too. I know it's hard to understand how a man can love another man who beat him so senselessly, but it's the only love I ever had. Sometimes I curse him, but then I blame myself. Isn't he the one who needs our love and help? I know I should hate him, but my anger is so old. If I forgive him, can I release him from my soul? I know it was wrong, but it felt so right. Didn't know this would haunt me for the rest of my life. I wanna forgive him, but it's so hard to do. I guess the truth is, someone hurt him too. Thank you. So I'd like to share just a couple of short poems in addition on a much lighter note. I recently turned 60. Are there any other 60-somethings here today? Yay!
Way over 60-somethings.
So I wrote a poem called Sexagenarian. There's a certain sexiness that comes with being a sexagenarian. Sexagenarians are simply more fun. Sex is sensational with a sexagenarian. Sexagenarians are smart, stupendous, stellar, and sexa, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Sexagenarians are sexagenerous to a fault. So,
You can have enough.
oh, you can have too much.
Really?
Yeah,
Can you die of joy?
you can die of joy.
That's sad.
Well, not really. I mean, it's a really good way to die. It involves a lot of smiling and laughing. Most people don't want to make the effort.
Oh, no, that's sad.
Well, it's a choice. And a choice is a beautiful thing.
And other.
A one or the other.
Oh, another?
Yeah.
So it's good to die of joy.
It's good to die of joy.
You like it here.
I love it here.
I love rainbows.
I love rainbows.
Give me a rainbow.
Okay, you can have mine.
Won't you miss it?
No, they're everywhere. Plenty to share.
Everywhere?
Yeah.
Where?
Well, you know, it's the darndest thing. People are always looking for rainbows, but if you look, they're right in front of you.
I don't see them.
Look closer. Thank you.
So next is me. I'm Carol Worsbicky. With Harold, I help him edit a literary magazine that we put out through Middle Church from the writing group. And I'd just like to take a minute to thank Janet for making this event possible. Hopefully we will have more of these. So for the writing group that meets here once a month, this was back in October and we had to write a ghost story. So this is what I came up with. 1, the artist. She was a little anxious about her art opening. She sat in front of an open window, appreciating the gentle breeze of the unseasonably warm dusk as she looked out at the fog's dampening effect on the wrought iron balcony. She'd hoped her new landscapes, inspired by a recent trip to Glacier National Park, captured the striations of the rocks, the chiaroscuro of the pebbles in the lake, the bizarre perspective of black bears appearing as tiny specks on the opposite cliff face. Turning back to the paintings, she was satisfied. No visitors had arrived yet. Suddenly the lights in the gallery dimmed, just momentarily, almost imperceptibly. With this phenomenon came a faint howling. Something instinctive in her made her scan one of the paintings for the source of the sound. There among the trees, rendered so subtly as to be almost indistinguishable from the beige ground, was a wolf, shaggy, gray, regarding her with its feral but intelligent gaze. She didn't remember painting him. Then she heard a crunching sound behind her. Turning, she saw her forest painting dusted with the beginnings of snowfall. Just then guests began to arrive. Warm greetings and praise were exchanged amid the wine and cheese. She forgot about the two strange occurrences with her paintings until a grisly bear-looking man with a full beard embraced her, exclaiming, "Why, Sarah, you've made Glacier National Park come alive for me." Sarah glanced at the two paintings that had initially spooked her. They had reverted to their original state. The wolf had retreated into the woods and the snow had evaporated. "Maybe I'll paint them for real," she said to herself. And those bears, even though I could barely see them. 2. The wolf. He lived deep in the woods. Every so often, he'd venture out to the clearing and stand on his side of the canvas, peering out, usually when he sensed his creator was in the gallery. He knew she was female from the way the other humans in the gallery interacted with her. He could only see what silently drifted into the frame of the picture of which she simultaneously was and was not a part. She seemed to dwell among humans in the same way he dwelt among the trees and other hidden creatures of the forest. An interdependency his instinctive mind could not grasp. And yet she had created him, the wolf, albeit out of her subconscious. That was why she seemed startled every time she glanced his way before he had time to turn and recede with a flick of his reddish-gray tail. He craved these rare interactions, mainly because they broke up the monotony. Day after day, hunting for food, sleeping, siring pups, the whole cycle of survival repeating. He wondered what human life cycles were like, what occupied their days. Pondering this helped pass the time. 3. The tree. Snow, and melt, and snow again. The tree needed moisture, any kind, dew, rain, ice dripping. If the tree's creator was absent from the gallery for too long a period, it began to dehydrate. Her reappearance was a signal for the clouds to mass over the treetops and yield precipitation. The tree could not move along the ground, but it could bend. Inclining its head toward the edge of the canvas, it could sense the movement of human visitors in the gallery. Many, in preparation for their visit, seemed to be carrying their gardens with them, scarves with landscapes on them, hats and pins with fake flowers. The trees thought it sad that they had to content themselves with these micro-environments. At least the tall pine had its brothers and sisters nearby, with whom it regularly communicated about climate and other concerns. 4. The bear. The bear was far away from the canvas's surface, on the side of a mountain, so the humans in the gallery appeared as specks to her, pointillous dots crawling across a flat surface. Her 3 cubs, which she kept close by, filled most of the frame anyway, and they similarly occupied most of her attention. She was thankful for her offspring. They kept the days from getting too monotonous, restricted as they were to their turf as it had been painted. 5. Sarah. Sarah contemplated her canvas, paintbrush poised in an attitude of indecision and at the same time intense concentration. The lives percolating within her compositions posed an interesting challenge. How to paint something that was at once there and not there, something like Schrodinger's cat, but not quite. The brush seemed to move as of its own accord, like the oracle on a Ouija board. This had happened many times since her gallery opening, so she wasn't startled. Underneath the bristles, a new landscape was forming. She couldn't tell what it was at first, the objects blurry and indistinct. Suddenly, a female figure emerged wearing a pretty floral scarf over her black coat, and another with a pin on her lapel of a deer. More figures materialized, almost filling the frame. In the foreground was a table laden with wine, cheese, and fruit. It was the scene from that first night, the opening. She'd never painted humans before. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was the grizzly man. She jumped a bit. She'd been focusing so hard on her painting that she'd forgotten he was in the room. "Sorry," Sasha said. "No problem," Sarah replied, a glow spreading over her face. "Now stand still so I can paint you."
The man from the future. It's all either in God's hands or it's only matter in motion and matters of chance. Declare the falling dice. Die, die, the falling dice scream to each other. The man from the future came to our time to tell us the true story of our time, as he understood it. The man from the future, a white man, comes to our time and tries to explain our time to us from the perspective of his future. And his explanation is a very interesting picture of our time. But years later, we discover he was not a man from the future, this white man, but a man of his own time. And his time is up. This future man, says his adversary, is a tedious but sometimes amusing old beatnik who smokes weed and listens to old music on a CD player while wandering the labyrinth of his soul. Wandering the labyrinth of the soul. His soul and our soul, future man claims, the macrocosmic soul. It is great to live in historical times because he can write about his own experience, and it was great to be writing his own experience as history until he comes to what he believes to be the end of history. The sharp point of the now touches the page of the here, he writes. What comes next? How does this sentence end? What is the pen point trying to say? Words, sentences becoming thoughts, not detached from thought, but handling thought, doing things with thought, considering what it is that the point of the pen has been saying to him. He has no idea if history has an end, or has already ended, or if history even exists, or even if the cosmos exists. Some claim that the cosmos, the universe we pray to, does not exist, and they pray to what is called an abyss, because ultimate reality is inconceivable for our nervous system, aka soul, and beyond definition and conception. So they pray to a contraception of God, to a God who is not ready to be born in the collective mind. It's all matter in motion, this ink I push around the notebook pages, praying to the abyss, spilling signs on the blank paper cosmos. I wish I could believe what it means. But this pen pushing isn't only a matter of belief or wishing, and all intentions are hidden in the abyss. This void at the center of myself is talking to himself again. But it's only another one of his attempts to adopt a God's eye view of his life and our lives and our history, so-called. To have a true conception of God, he wrote, is to be unable to conceive of God's non-existence. Does being unable to conceive of God's non-existence prove that God exists? His inner adversary asks. The only absolute proof would be a Mount Sinai, face to face, Here I am, Lord, encounter, and in such a case, one wouldn't be examining hypothetical arguments about whether meeting one's creator was really taking place, and if you really were still doubting that this moment before the throne of God was happening, then no absolute proof would ever be possible until your ego and cogito together are annihilated in the one. You will not become God. God will become you in eternity, he wrote. Where did that sentence come from? He asks. You have not been annihilated in eternal. You are alive in the here and now, with no choice but to make choices. Choose your words carefully and determine what your work is, or where your love is, and where you are, and so on, to respond to others and your environment, build community, and create happinesses. Now this little homily is getting too sweet, he wrote. I am running out of time. Time passes. It is Ash Wednesday. He opens his notebook and writes, "The dust of death is the soul in which life germinates." He meant to write soil and wrote soul by mistake. This sort of slip of the pen is exactly what I'm talking about. Dan.
This will go better if I'm not harsh. I swear it's therapeutic.
That's why we bought it.
Skull. Thanks, everyone. Up on the mountain, some say, Old Tree has grown since before there was a mountain. The mountain is Old Tree's secret. The mountain is Old Tree's gift to her children. Before there was a mountain, Old Tree was already Old Tree, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren unto the utmost great. Nowhere in the invisible circles of progeny was even one of Old Tree's ancestors. Before there were countless descendants to buffer Old Tree against the unrelated world, there was a vast sheet of ice. Not the last one, but the one before. 7 days after the cliff of ice had melted back to reveal Old Tree's home, her first green leaves unfurled to begin their long worship of the sun. Before the ice came again, Old Tree had produced a nation of her children, so they covered the mountain together, and as it grew up under them, Old Tree's secret bulging skyward. When the ice returned, Old Tree and her many children watched it lap against the mountain, wiping the lower slopes clean. Other ice grew down there from the top of Old Tree's secret, and other ice grew down from the top of the mountain, from the top of Old Tree's secret. But between the mountain top ice and the ice on the plains, was Old Tree's realm a safe spot from which to watch the ice arrive and scour and retreat once more. Old Tree saw much in her long witness, many things occurring within her sightless gaze, she whispered to her children. Her roots never quite touched the roots of her nearest offspring, nor did any of the roots of her children push up against the roots of any others. Do not think, though, that they floated there on the earth unconnected to their kin. Chemicals floated between the almost touching roots, so the whole mountain was a great dendritic network. The chemicals carried whispered reports of what Old Tree had seen, and also what her children had seen with their own sightless gaze. In the time before Old Tree had begun to grow her secret, she saw a thing she could not tell her children. If any saw what she saw, they chose to shelter her from it. For 100 years she watched as an oak, no kin to her, but treasured kith. Each fall produced its bounty of acorns and dropped them on the unprepared world, but not one of the acorns stayed where it fell, as a great swarm of women advanced across the ground, picking up each acorn and dropping it in a basket to be brought home and ground into flour. Each acorn that fell after the women had completed their work was snatched up by a squirrel, an Old Tree who minded such things, saw that not one of the acorns that was buried was allowed to grow, instead dug up by some squirrel in the winter. For 100 years, Oak did not produce one child, and then her time ended with a lightning strike. For 100 years, Old Tree had believed Oak would one day have a child, even if it was only one, and that child would carry on for Oak, but it was not to be. And when the lightning ended all hope, Old Tree considered it the saddest event of her long life. She could not tell her children. It would sadden them too much. Instead, she held the memory between two of her own almost touching roots and poured the memory into that spot, a spot where the earth grew hard until a stone that sat between those two roots, and for the first time, a part of Old Tree could not speak directly to another part of herself. In another time, Old Tree saw another tragedy, something more subterranean than Old Tree, something that descended into the depths of the earth in the times of cold, and whose toadstools only flickered above the ground long enough to send forth its own child, and the warmth grew even bigger until it encountered the most distant of Old Tree's children and slid around the child's roots, encasing them so that each one fell silent and the tree really did float in the earth alone. The invader muted and deafened another of Old Tree's children, and another and another. Whole groves were silenced. Only when all of Old Tree's children saw the problem did they devise a solution, a new thought that drove away the fungus. 200 years later, the last of the fungus retreated and never bothered Old Tree's children again, but the attack had done harm even deeper than the silencing of groves. Old Tree's children no longer wanted to bring children of their own into the world. New offspring would be new places for new enemies to encounter the children of Old Tree. New trees were new entry points for invaders, and from there, an invader might follow the generations of trees all the way back to Old Tree. For 500 years, longer than the lives of elms and maples and poplars, no child of Old Tree produced a single seed. Old Tree made the terrible decision to draw the memory of the invader to her, until all her children had forgotten what happened, began to send out new seeds again. Old Tree, alone with the memory, held it between two of her roots until it formed something new and dense and hard. And so it went. The trees, who lived such very long lives, would see a tragedy beyond their ability to witness, and Old Tree would draw the memory of the tragedy to herself, and she would form it into something hard between her roots, and the hard things would sink deeper into the earth until the space between her roots was cleared once more. Deep in the earth, the hard old memories accumulated until it began to grow beneath Old Tree and her children. Old Tree's secret memories, sequestered from her children, accumulated until all of them grew, not on a plain scrubbed driftless by the old ice, but on a high mountain, so high it was always topped with ice. Old Tree's secrets became their home, but none knew it. Sometimes a distracted root would bump up against one of the old memories, its tip poking into a tiny crack, and as it grew, the root would split the memory and free it. But by then, all the substance was gone, leaving that dust of memory behind. Not enough even to bother the tree that had encountered it, much less spread the pain through the forest once more. And that is where the mountain came from, and all the trees that stand upon it.
Thank you everyone for coming. I looked for these and found these three pieces. The first two have to do with the coronavirus because in a few days it'll be the 3 years since that began here. And the first poem actually takes place in the Union Square Market. And then the third poem is something different. Flower shopping in the coronavirus. Cloudy, cool afternoon, few people at the farmer's market, most businesses closed, first month of the coronavirus. The flower seller was already reloading his truck. Too late for tulips, I wondered? What color, he asked, and went into the truck. Came out empty-handed. Too late. Appreciating his effort, wanting to end on a positive note, I smiled and said, "That's okay. It's really nice you tried." He went back into the truck, came out with a pot of tulips. I started to pay. He put his hands down, palms facing the ground. "No, money is worth nothing. Your smile is worth everything." He gave me the translucent pink-purple tulips. Okay. Breathing during the coronavirus. Remember, they told us if we didn't get a ventilator, we might die. We can laugh now. Okay, I was there. It was night, the air very fresh, the sky dark. I heard, inhale, the waves relax, stretch, reach out to the shore. I felt, exhale, the waves relax, stretch. Again and again, no rush, continuous, monumental, reaching around the world, expanding and contracting, almost timeless, for millions of years before humans, before mammals, since creation. It is still here, asleep or awake, whether I remember or not, my breathing and the world's breathing. I am protected, embraced, my breathing inside the breathing of the world. Okay, now I promised you something different, right? Here or there. Here, I wake up to the early cars on Pleasant Street in Marblehead. After our boarding house breakfast downstairs, I walk to the ocean's edge, immense, stretching into the distance. Soon I will travel by bus for hours to New York City, there where I have lived so many years, through jobs, romances, efforts and pleasures, among skyscrapers and subways and buses. Here or there, where do I belong, if anywhere? Grandparents emigrated from 4 corners of Europe. There is no real belonging for me. Let my roots rest and my wings spread. Let me move connected less to the ground and more to the air and water. Each day I will belong to that day and moment in my final years on this planet.